So I'm now going to run through the treatment options that we have available, not all of them, but most of them. And I'm not going to talk about the earlier treatments, the injectables. I'm talking about the ones that have come since then. And there's enough of those to occupy a full lecture, but I'm going to try and summarise them for you. So here's natalizumab, or Tysabri. This was the first of the highly effective treatments which became available. And it looked in its study, AFFIRM, it looked at this measure which we didn't call NEDA of those days, but it grew into NEDA, and they had 28% of patients that achieved that over 2 years in that study. And subsequently it's been shown to be higher. Alemtuzumab that I've just talked to you about, or Lemtrada, this is a treatment which is given firstly on 5 days of 1 year, then 3 days a year later, and then in 2/3 of patients may not need any more treatment than that. So in their study, they found that NEDA got out to 48%, and it was sustained over those 5 years, which I just showed you with the shrinkage slide. And fingolimod was the first oral treatment, which Marcus mentioned earlier. Wouldn't it be nice if we had an oral treatment? Well, this was the first of them, and it was accompanied by a couple of others, and we've got more as well now. But I'm just going to concentrate on this one. This was from a fungus which was identified in Japan, and what it does is, and most of you will know who are on this, it locks up lymphocytes in lymph nodes. So it does the same thing in a way as Tysabri does. It stops the white cells getting into the brain, crossing that barrier and causing injury in the spinal cord and brain. And it had a level of NEDA at around the same, at around 45%. So just going through these, alemtuzumab, it acts by hitting lymphocytes, B cells and T cells. I won't bother you too much about those, but just remember that B cells make antibodies and T cells attack cells themselves. And we thought, up until a couple of years ago, that this was a T-cell disease, and all our treatments were targeting T cells, and we now think that the B cell is as big a bad boy as the T cell. And then fingolimod, as I've just said, it locks them up in the lymph nodes. Ocrelizumab, this is the new treatment that's just becoming available. Hopefully it'll be here early next year. This requires 6 monthly in infusions only, and it targets the B cells, and it had a rate of NEDA in its 2 major studies in relapsing disease of 48%. It's also been trialled in patients with primary progressive MS and shown to be effective to a level of around 25%. Now, I just want to caution you on this, that those patients in that trial, there were about 26% of them that had activity that we see in relapsing disease, but at a lesser degree. And so they were included in the trial because we often see that early in primary progressive MS, and that's maybe why they responded so well. So that's why I'm alluding to the fact that we're now beginning to think that progressive MS is the same disease with slightly different manifestations early on than relapsing disease. Certainly if you target B cell, you can get quite good results. Tecfidera, or BG12, is another oral tablet taken 240 milligrams twice daily, and it demonstrated quite good levels of NEDA, and is well established in the marketplace in Australia and used by many people. Cladribine is a tablet which was trialled successfully, but didn't make it to market. It was approved for use in Australia and I think Russia, but when the FDA said no, we're not going to approve it, the pharmaceutical company had to withdraw it. Now the reason is that it costs the pharmaceutical company around $1 to $2 billion to bring a drug to market. So it's a massive investment, and if they're not going to get a return, they're not going to do it, unfortunately. That's what we have to live with. And I will mention a little bit about the relationship between pharma and the Progressive MS Alliance at the end of this talk. However, what I am pleased to say is that cladribine they've gone away, they've done a lot more work, and they've brought it back, and it's now on the threshold of being made available again to Australians and other people. I think it's actually been approved for use already in the US. So that's really good news, because it works in a way somewhat similar to how alemtuzumab or Lemtrada works. It destroys T and B cells and gives people effectively a new immune system. Sort of a bit like a cheap rate stem cell treatment. And here's the stem cell therapy treatment. So everybody thinks that this is the panacea for MS treatment, and it is very good, but the way it's done is a risk to life, because you destroy everything. You destroy the immune system and the marrow, the blood forming system. And the reason you have a stem cell transplant is to reform your marrow so you can survive the treatment. The stem cells do nothing, as far as we're aware at the moment, in the brain and spinal cord. All they do is reconstitute the marrow and the immune systems for you. So the question is, why would you do this if you have other treatments which are less risky? And most of us can't answer that, but there are many people who have this fixation that stem cells hold the answer, and unfortunately, you meet this all the time, when faith meets evidence, faith always wins, unfortunately. So moving on to daclizumab, another new treatment. This is just becoming available. It's an injection, and it changes the balance between these lymphocytes in the body. It gives you more of these natural killer cells, and is looking quite effective. It's just becoming, well, it is available now for use. The problem for neurologists is that it's a very dense field of treatments, and finding where daclizumab fits in for use is not that easy, but I'm sure it will pick up with time and be useful. Onto the progressive MS side of things, biotin is vitamin B7, and most of us were a little sceptical when we saw the initial study of this, showing that patients with progressive MS actually improved. But the data held up, and there's now a very large phase 3 trial being undertaken in America and Europe to look at this further. But there is a scientific rationale for why it might work, because it seems to improve mitochondrial function. That's a little subcellular particle which provides energy to every cell in the body, and you need those to conduct impulses down axons. And we think that one of the reasons axons die over time is when they've been injured. You need more mitochondria. To make more mitochondria, you have to reproduce them, and when you reproduce them, they're prone to mutations in their DNA, and then they're not really good mitochondria. They don't make enough energy, and so the cell dies because of lack of energy. So this looks as though it may improve that side of function, as well as affect fatty acid synthesis for myelination. So there's a reason why biotin might be useful. It's an oral treatment. It's hard to get, and you need a lot more than you can get from your local pharmacy. Siponimod is another drug which is very similar to fingolimod. It acts on a receptor which locks the cells up in lymph nodes, as I said, but strangely, it's shown to be effective in secondary progressive MS in that trial. Now, in that trial also, there was a number of patients who did have relapsing disease, so it may be that in part it's due to affecting the relapsing side of it, the inflammatory side of the disease, and not what we call the progressive side of the disease. We just don't know. Maybe there's more relapsing type disease, more relapsing type inflammation in these patients than we thought there was, and that's why these are effective. These are answers which we have to determine. Then finally, on the B cell story, again, these drugs are in early trials, and these attack a later developed B cell than does ocrelizumab, the one I showed you before. And as such, it has an earlier effect on the production of antibody. And it's hoped that this drug will be as useful in multiple sclerosis, but also in another condition which is much more common in Asia and Africa and non-Caucasian countries, called neuromyelitis optica spectrum disorder. I'm sorry, it's a long-winded thing. We used to think that was just a variant of MS. We now know it's quite a different disease, although it looks the same, and it's in some cases difficult to distinguish, but the treatment is different, and this looks as though it will be a very good treatment for that condition. So, just to recap a little bit, on when we would treat patients with these different types of disease, and allow me just to have a little bit about RIS. Now, this is a theoretical construct, if you like. We see these people who have a scan for, say they had a car accident or a headache or whatever, and the scanners come back and say, goodness me, this patient looks like they've got multiple sclerosis. And you speak to the patient, they've never had a symptom like multiple sclerosis ever. So do they have MS or not? Well, many of us believe that this is MS in waiting, that this is maybe even how progressive MS starts, with no symptoms, but we're just seeing them earlier than they have, because they haven't got any symptoms yet and we're seeing them there. So should you treat these people or not? The answer is not known yet, but many of us, if we see lesions in the cervical spinal cord, which we know are going to cause problems with walking later on, if we see these things in the we see new typical MS-type lesions, so indicating the disease activity is there, even though it's not causing symptoms. Or if we find oligoclonal bands in the cerebrospinal fluid, and many of you will have had this done, it's another feature indicating chronicity, so it's been there for a while, and it means that part of the immune system has colonised. When it's gone across the blood-brain barrier, it's colonised the spinal cord and the brain, and it's making disease of its own. They're making disease of their own accord inside the brain and spinal cord. Now, the problem with that is we don't have many treatments which can get to them. So we can stop the disease outside the brain and spinal cord, but then we have the problem with the immune system that's got inside the brain and spinal cord, and it's going to keep causing disease. So if we see this, we know that that process has already started, and we want to be even more aggressive with treatment. So that's why we want to have that done. Now, not everybody understands why they don't do this test, but that's what's going to turn out to be the reason. In CIS patients, a male person, we know they have more aggressive disease in the spinal cord. If you see cervical cord lesions, you see new focal activity, and you have oligoclonal bands, then we would start treating them aggressively also. Relapsing remitting disease, we have a very low tolerance for disease activity. Many parts of the world, up until recently, used to say, well, let's try a drug which is less effective but has less side effects, and then we'll escalate the treatment if we see disease activity. Well, up until 5 years ago, some countries didn't even think they needed to do MR scans to see disease activity, so how could they escalate? So those patients got worse without them knowing about it. In Australia, we've been really fortunate, and most of us have this low threshold for any disease activity. We want to start aggressively to start with, and then become more aggressive if we see disease activity. We think that any disease activity we can see is still a reflection there's a lot more happening that we can't see, and therefore you have to be aggressive in treatment. Secondary progressive MS, the same thing, any change, and primary progressive MS now I think will start to be treated in the same way as early relapsing disease. So let me just move on to progressive MS. I said that it was thought to be different, and that's the way it evolved because that's what clinicians saw. They saw this progressive disease, they saw relapsing disease. Okay, so there are two different diseases. And because all the drug companies, rightly, went for disease which had a lot of expression of disease activity and damped that down, nothing happened for progressive MS. So they were left off on the side as different and not responsive. And there were trials which were done early on which were said to have failed, but they failed because they defined the cause of progression wrongly. The trialists, we did. We thought that if people gradually lost their ability to walk, that was due to inflammatory disease, where it was due to another form of pathological process, which I'll talk about in a minute. And therefore, the inflammatory disease was being treated successfully by these early treatments, but because the patients were losing their ability to walk, it was deemed to be a drug trial failure. Now, we now gone back and looked at those, and there are strong hints in many of those earlier trials that the drugs were effective. We just measured the wrong thing. So that's why I think that we're going to turn to view this as one disease fairly soon. And we do know that this outside immune system, the immune system in the main part of the body called the adaptive immune system, is involved in progressive MS early on because they respond to that treatment. So it must be working outside as well. Therefore, the outside immune system is active early on and may be active later on even. So just to highlight that difference, here we have a relapse. This is secondary progressive relapse. Progression in terms of disability. Another relapse, gets better, gets worse again, plateaus out, and then worsens after this lesion on an MR scan. So it can be clinical relapse or MR relapse, which causes worsening of disease. And in primary progressive MS, many of those patients will have a late relapse somewhere down the line. So again, I think this is evidence that we do need to be treating them all the same, maybe with different emphases, different drugs, but treating them early and treating them with anti-inflammatory type disease treatments first. So turning to the progressive side of MS, now this is not related to, not directly related to relapse type attacks. This is related to the progression of deterioration, of worsening disability, so less distance that one can walk, less cognitive function, being less sharp, worsening bladder function, all sorts of things which slowly worsen. Even the person concerned may not be aware of it until they look back and say, gee, a year ago I was doing this, but I feel okay, I feel good, so I'm okay, but it's not. It may not be. So these are the possible processes which might cause that progression to occur. And I'll just divvy them up and make it a bit easier for you. So slowly expanding pre-existing lesions, so there's low-grade grumbling inflammation around those white spots. The adaptive inflammation, this is an ectopic lymphoid follicle. That's what I was talking about when you get the immune system colonising the brain and spinal cord and causing disease. We now can image these on scans and see them and target them. And then within those, B cells are really prominent, and we think they may be driven by this virus, Epstein-Barr virus, which many of you may have heard about. So that's that side of it, all related to the immune system, which is outside the brain and spinal cord or colonised inside it. And then we have another immune system, the immune system which is inside the brain and spinal cord, called the innate immune system, and that's part of the brain, the microglial cells, the astrocytes and macrophages. They're all in there all the time, and they turn into bad guys. When you've got inflammation going on from this process here, these chaps get activated and start to cause injury of their own, we think. We know that microglia and astrocytes can each cause the others to become bad guys and to cause injury in their own right. So that's one of the things, areas where we're looking at. And then the non-inflammatory side of it is remyelination failure, the mitochondrial mutations that I talked about, where you get failure of energy, and the axon dies. So there's that process as well. So the three main areas which we have to target and find out which one is working most in progression. Progression is either in primary progressive or secondary progressive disease. No, I think we can skip that. So there's some treatment gaps that are really outstanding. So we don't know the extent of the role of the outside immune system in this, but it does look as though if you suppress the disease early, you don't get secondary progressive MS. So that's led some of us to believe that we've seen the end, if you like, of disabling relapsing MS. In the same way as you don't see people with disfiguring rheumatoid arthritis, because the rheumatologists have really been hammering the inflammation there. And I think that we're going to see the same thing happen here in MS over a longer time scale. And then the result of the effects of previous injury, those things that can cause a problem with axonal function and survival, and then the role of the innate immune system. That's the ones that are in the brain and spinal cord anyway. So there's a group that got together, a group of MS societies, including MS Research Australia, of which MSWA contributes to more than any other society in Australia, the Society of Canada, Italy, UK, America, many other societies, and we now have a group there that is bringing together scientists from around the world and constructing directed research to answer questions on this progressive MS topic. So between 2012 and 2017, we're budgeting 23 million euros for research. We've committed already 14 million euros to a number of projects, 26 smaller projects, and 23 smaller projects, these challenge awards, and we've had 3 collaborative network awards. The collaborative network awards are really targeting this problem of progression. So there are 2 problems here. One, we need to understand what it is that causes progression and how it works, and so therefore we can target the mechanism. And 2, we need to know how to identify it earlier than waiting for someone to slowly get worse. So we're actually funding that one, looking for an MRI marker that tells us ahead of time that certain patients are worsening or likely to worsen. And this is a really important study, and we're very grateful for all the pharmaceutical companies which have conducted trials in the past, and in those trials they've had patients who've had no treatment and they've had patients who had treatment. So the pharmaceutical companies have done that. They've made available all their MR scans to us of the patients who are not receiving treatments. And they're all being put in together from all around the world, tens of thousands of scans, harmonised so they can all be analysed, and then we're using both eyes of radiologists and what's called deep machine learning, so they can see things which we don't see and learn what it is and pick changes ahead of time. So this will shorten the duration of trials that we have to have. So that's a real advantage, and we're hopeful that that will work. And on the other side, we have these pipelines looking for drugs which may target those processes which I've alluded to already, that is axons degenerating, mitochondria not working properly, and inflammation of the innate immune system. So Francisco Quintana, I'm in the group that's overseeing his trial, and he's found that sphingolipids, a chemical in the brain, actually activates microglia, and he's got some drugs already sorted out that can stop this and therefore may well be useful as treatments. So this is early days. We're still only at identifying. This is one of those things, miglustat. It's a drug which works and it's actually been approved for treatment in a rare disease called Niemann-Pick disease. But the fact that we can treat what's thought to be a congenital disease of the brain with this sort of treatment and understanding is really exciting. and it's working in a EAE model. That's a sort of a mouse model that looks a bit like MS, and it's been effective there also. So it's bearing fruit already, and I'm only just showing you a tiny little bit of what the Quintano group is doing with their 4 million euros. But this is what they've achieved already, though. So, to conclude on the progressive MS side of things, there are significant advances in not just in progressive MS, but looking at those which become progressive from relapsing MS, so-called secondary MS. It looks as though if you do treat aggressively and early, you can prevent secondary progressive MS. And it looks as though using this same approach in early progressive MS, we might have the same outcome. Time will tell on that. And then on the innate immune system side of it, which is what I talked about, the microglia, the astrocytes and things, what Quintana's looking at, we have a promise of advances. We're about to embark on a new round of proof of concept studies, smaller trials, highly targeted, highly enriched patients to answer specific questions that will enable us to then go out and look at bigger trials. So that's the process there. And then the biomarker story is the one that's lagging, but hopefully that's going to pick up and become available for use. There's already a blood test which can predict which people are going to get worse and which are not. That's available and it's available for trials, and it's being proven in trials, and I have no doubt that it'll be available soon. And then there's the MR one that I talked about from Doug Arnold. But overall, from the 15 years ago, Marcus, this is a huge advance. It's not finished by any means, but what has happened is that the area that has to be, the type of research, the type of approach has to be industrial, has to be global, has to be strategic, and then highly targeted within that again. So that's why it's moved to an international level, and I think that's why this alliance, looking at progressive MS, will be successful. I'm happy to take any questions on any of the topics that I've talked about, or anything else you want to talk about, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Harris. It is really exciting. There's so much still ongoing. And MSWA has requested that $500,000 of our donation to MS Research Australia actually goes towards the Progressive MS Alliance, which is really good news as well. We can take a couple of questions. I think Damien's got the roving mic down there.
My question is in relation to most of the research seems to be looking at disease-modifying therapies. We know that MS can be impacted by lifestyle choices. So can you tell me a little bit more about what research is going on into things like exercise, stress, exposure to chemicals, exposure to diet? What sort of research is happening in that side of things?
Look, they are very good questions. Let me just summarise it quickly. The environmental influences are still being studied, and there are large numbers of people around the world doing that, and certainly air quality has now come up as a possible thing. Smoking we know about, even water piping type smoking is a risk for MS. Vitamin D, sunlight, healthy diet. All of those things are really important, mainly in the susceptibility, that is the risk of getting MS. What we don't know yet is how effective they are in controlling MS once it's started. However, I've got to say that compared to disease-modifying therapies, they're a bit player. I mean, I would just tear my hair out if I heard someone say, well, I'm going to depend on a diet or whatever. We've seen that. People have tried that before we had any treatments. And it's really sad when that happens because they are complementary, if you like, but they're not exchangeable. That's my view. And I'm not saying that because I'm heavily involved in the disease-modifying things. I'm heavily involved in understanding what happens and stopping it. I don't care what we use. But I know that just vitamin D on its own is not enough, even though we are, and MSWA is helping in this in Australia, running one of 2 big studies looking at vitamin D very early on in the disease. Does that answer the question? Yeah, good.
Hi, Professor Carroll, just interested in knowing whether taking biotin is useful, if you're aware of anything that would indicate that it's useful in remitting relapsing, whether there's any benefit at all. Because it came up with the secondary, I think it was.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Well, it's likely that it will be. If it's effective in secondary, it'll be effective in relapsing, because these conditions are not so separated. In that slide I showed early on of how the disease works, with the big sweeping circles and green lines and what have you, that process which biotin might work in is there early on in relapsing disease as well. You just don't see it.
Right. So would it be? Do neurologists?
I don't have trial data for that.
Right. Okay.
But it's on an a priori hypothesis that it should work. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
One more.
Hi, Mr. Carroll. Nobody seems to be talking about neuroplasticity as a method of countering negative changes in MS. I've just suffered from about 5 years of severe chronic pain, and my drive is really to kind of normalise my pain system by neuroplasticity. Could you say something?
Yes, it's a very good point you've raised, and I apologise for omitting that. But one of the things that I'm given oversight for in the Alliance is symptomatic treatment as well. So we're just, in July I'll be in London, where we'll be presenting to the main group what we can do in neuroplasticity and restorative neurology and symptom management. It's a big area that has been overlooked, if you like, to some extent until now, particularly in patients with progressive MS. We haven't had anything to stop it, the actual disease, until now, and how effective those treatments are probably depend on early treatment at the moment. But in the meantime, many people, such as yourself, have had these symptoms develop because of that. And there is a big effort to look at cognitive reserve, the effect of exercise and cognitive training. In fact, one of the grants that nearly got up, those 3 big ones I mentioned to you, was just on that. And it was with great regret that the lay members of our alliance eventually said, no, we won't press for that one to be one of the 3. We'll go with understanding the disease and try and manage the symptom one in a second round. But it's certainly at the forefront of thinking, yes.
Last question.
Is there any validity in this stem cell treatment that we're constantly bombarded with by current affair programs? You spend $100,000 and you go to Russia or you go to Mexico, and apparently there's some treatment in Queensland available now. Is there any validity in any of that sort of treatment?
Broadly speaking, yes. It's a matter of how you achieve it and whether you're the right person for it. And you can get stem cell treatments in Australia, even in Western Australia. But as I've mentioned on the way through in the talk, there are better ways of achieving that than risking stem cell treatment, because, as I said, stem cells are just there to rescue your bone marrow and lymph system so you can keep living. It's a dangerous treatment, and it was useful earlier on because we didn't have the treatments we have now. Now we have the treatments which give you the same outcome, a new immune system and suppression of disease, without that risk. So, to my mind, its need should be diminished, but it's still available, yes. The reason it's advertised is because those people are making money out of it.
Would you all join me in thanking Professor Carroll? extremely lucky that we have someone of his calibre available to come and talk to us, but also sitting on our board, and he's in